I'm Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now. Today's topic is identity as a choice. As always, would love to hear from you. Your questions or comments are always welcome. Just type in your thoughts on any of the streams that we have going today. And if you haven't already been over there, please check out Sober Now's Facebook page. Give that a quick like and you'll get notifications for future live streams and other content that we're creating. So let's just jump right into this. It drives me crazy. It's an occupational hazard as a therapist that people often tell me that they're trying to find themselves as though it's some great philosophical journey. And I don't see it that way. I see it as something that's pragmatic, something that's chosen. Certainly there are a handful of aspects about identity that are not a choice. We don't get to choose the color of our skin. We don't get to choose our sexual orientation. We don't get to choose the families that we're born to. But most of the important aspects of identity really are things that are free to be chosen, free to be embodied. And I always start off with E. E. Cummings. He said that it takes great courage to grow up and become who you really are. And I have absolutely found that to be true. The folks that I know who I think are most authentically, most genuinely, and most passionately living are all in some form of recovery. And recovery is incredibly conducive to transforming identity. That's the whole point, right? Is to develop a life that's so great we wouldn't want to screw it up with drugs and alcohol. So I want to explore some pragmatic ways that we get down to that choice, but I also want to make sure that we're doing first things first. We have a tendency to put the cart before the horse. Our goals initially, of course, need to be centered around a pathway to recovery, because if we don't have that, anything else that we try to build, we've proven over and over again, is sooner or later going to fall apart. So as simple as it sounds, I always encourage folks to follow Maslow's hierarchy, because ideally we're building a foundation for a better life, and that foundation is built on safety, stability, and the fulfillment of really basic life needs. And my experience is that most of us tend to hate that approach. We're in a hurry. We're people who want to make up for lost time. There's nothing especially sexy or exciting about making sure that you're drinking enough water or making sure that you're eating some vegetables now and again. We need accountability. We need structure. We need healthy habits and routines. And we need to learn to be patient with ourselves. And that's usually one of the hardest lessons for us, because to be patient with someone is a very kind thing to be. And for most of us, being kind with ourselves is not what comes naturally. It is not what we learned. And so much of this process of choosing identity is actually a process of unlearning. And we'll touch more on that in a minute. So the basics have to be in place, and those basics need to incorporate a support system of people who are capable of challenging us, people who are calling us out. It's wonderful if they happen to be people that love us, but we need to have people in our lives that truly understand substance use disorder and can both reassure us and call us out when we're heading in the wrong direction, when we're being less than honest with ourselves. We need reality checks. We need folks that we can use as sounding boards and talk about, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm thinking and planning, and does that sound realistic? Does that sound healthy? We just need to take every caution to make sure that we're not doing this alone. And the next piece is we've achieved safety and stability. We have a recovery path. We have people that are walking the path with us. And the next piece is we need to heal the wounds. Any other approach would involve continuing to carry pain, continuing to have a distorted sense of ourselves, living with depression and anxiety, coping with fear in ways that are truly unmanageable. I would say a really vital part of our identities can be defined by what is it that we do to deal with fear. How is it that we approach ourselves, our lives? How do we approach other relationships? most often when we talk about our identities, we tend to define them in terms of the roles that we play in other people's lives. So I can define myself as a husband, as a father, as a brother, as a son. I can define myself by the things that I do professionally. I can define myself by hobbies and interests that I pursue. And these are important roles, but ideally those roles are transforming and becoming healthier over the course of recovery. They're things that we invest in, make amends to, and seek to examine our expectations, because that too is a vital aspect of our identity. We are people who tend to maintain mile-high expectations of ourselves because we're trying to live above reproach, because we're trying to make up for the past, but we're also people who maintain rock-bottom expectations of other people because we're on a lifelong journey to avoid disappointment. So ideally, as we continue this journey, we're embracing vulnerability. It's always so striking to me. We desperately want to be understood, but we're afraid to open up and show who we really are, describe what it is that we need, what it is that we're feeling. And in lots of ways, we're just compensating for a lot of past pain, a lot of past trauma. And we don't just compensate with substances. Certainly, we did that for too long, and it took a great toll. We also do this in a myriad of ways. We do it by being a people pleaser. We do it by being caregivers. We do it by being rescuers. We do it by placing far too much value on productivity. We tend to derive our sense of worth from what it is that we do, what it is that we produce. It's actually an interesting piece of mythology that lives on. We have this myth that people in active addiction and people in recovery have perhaps a poor work ethic, and that is definitely not my experience. Folks that I've worked with in active addiction often tell me the only thing that they feel good about is what they do for a living, what they do in terms of productivity. My experience of employing and working with people in recovery is that they work extraordinarily hard and are working to accomplish pretty amazing goals. So we work so hard because I think we want to be valued. What we really want is to belong, to be a part of, to be loved. But we only know to do what we know to do until we learn a better way. Ideally, as we're moving towards developing a greater sense of self and transforming our lives, we're identifying areas in which we experience shame and working to strip them away. And there's a lot of opportunity in this. We get to examine some of the things that we believe about ourselves. We get to notice and resolve false hope that we have about others changing, particularly in our families. Shame is the worst enemy of any person in recovery because it undermines everything that's possible in our lives. We don't let ourselves have what we don't believe we deserve. We'll self-sabotage it. We'll run from it. We'll hide from it. So our goal here is to achieve an integrated sense of self. Integration and catharsis are words that typically only counselors use, but integration means that we're taking the pieces of ourselves and putting them back together. And catharsis means that we're resolving and releasing everything that prevents the pieces from fitting into place. My friend Artis used to describe recovery as a jigsaw puzzle, where we see ourselves as broken. We want to be able to put these pieces together, but we'd like to be able to throw some of those pieces away because we find them too painful to deal with. We're too ashamed of them. It's too scary or too daunting to consider. Working through those memories, dealing with those intrusive thoughts, working through those powerful emotions. And it's a lot. And it's all the more reason not to be on this journey alone. It's all the more reason to ensure that we have a great deal of support and that we're setting goals that allow us to just chip away at this. Recovery is a process of transformation. And the biggest difficulty with that is that most of us didn't have a strong sense of who we were before we started using. This is the concept of arrested development. We know that people in early recovery tend to be emotionally immature because our emotional development was arrested at the point at which we started using substances to cope. We also know that trauma arrests development of a child. And so one of the pieces that I often explore with people is, were they free to rebel in their family of origin? This is why typically 13-year-olds are such angsty little creatures, is they've actually experienced some really important cognitive development, and they've come to a place where they have critical thinking skills and the ability to examine abstract concepts, and they start realizing that what they have been taught to believe is something that was just accepted and not challenged. So, for example, if you grow up in a family that says, well, we're Christian or we're Republicans or whatever it is, the child simply accepts those ideas without knowing how to examine them thoroughly. As we go through adolescence, the child, ideally in a healthy, well-adjusted family, is free to rebel, because what's happening there is the child is beginning to establish an identity as an individual as opposed to only being part of a family. And I remind folks that growing up is a very hard thing to do, even under the very best of circumstances. And if we're growing up in the midst of addiction, in the midst of abuse or neglect, any amount of adversity makes it all the more difficult for us to have a healthy sense of who we are, what's possible for us, what our place in the world is. And one of the most beautiful things that happens through the course of recovery is we come to understand that a great deal more perhaps is possible for us than we believed. We come to see that we have far more value than perhaps had been instilled in us. As my friends in NA say, lost dreams awaken and new possibilities arise, which is absolutely true and absolutely possible, and it tends to be exponential through the course of recovery. The longer we stay the course and the more we invest in ourselves, the more we allow others to invest in us, and the more we are of service to others, we form greater connections. And every single one of those relationships has the potential to enrich our lives, but also to teach us something about ourselves. Unlearning is such a difficult process. We have to identify a lot of the ideas, the really unhealthy ideas that were instilled within us as children. It saddens me how often I talk to people who see themselves as, well, the most common way that it's put is that they're not good enough. And I immediately challenge that idea. I'll ask, by what standards, by what criteria? Because, of course, it doesn't exist. It's one more thing that we believe that has no context, and it's also something that we only apply to ourselves. We don't apply that perspective to others. We don't tend to judge others in the ways that we judge ourselves. And I think what we find when we closely examine how it is that we relate to ourselves, because sadly too many of us are our own worst enemies. Most of us are highly avoidant of self. And I think what we find is that the ways in which we relate to ourselves are very similar to the ways in which our family of origin related to us. So if you grew up with really healthy, great caregivers, then chances are you already have some really valuable stuff instilled. If you grew up the way that I did, what you learned was a whole lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms and a whole lot of things about how to relate to yourself and others that aren't healthy. We tend to label that just with the idea of codependency, but there's so much more to it than that. Codependency doesn't really scratch the surface of what it's like to be your own worst enemy. And so when a person is making the investment of getting to know themselves and choosing their identity, I say that starts with self-respect and fairness. We all know how to be fair. We all know how to be respectful. To extend those courtesies to ourselves doesn't require that we change how we feel. It requires that we consider, how would you approach any other person whose recovery you want to support, or whose change process or transformation you want to encourage, right? We can't be putting people down as they're trying to rise up. And so allowing ourselves the same courtesy. I'm not talking about the self-affirmation or the idea that I love myself. I think those are only ideals. But to simply notice my self-talk, notice what I allow into my life, notice the boundaries that I do or don't set, notice the toxicity in myself and the toxicity that I have in the relationships in my life, and simply choose what is in my best interest, what is fair and respectful for me to do. Too many of us are locked into the idea that we are unlovable. Too many of us are locked into a lot of false beliefs about why our lives have unraveled the way that they have. And I always think of Good Will Hunting, the scene where Robin Williams' character confronts Matt Damon on his past abuse and is saying to him over and over again, it's not your fault that you survived these things. As children, we learn to blame ourselves for the abuse and the suffering that we experienced, and we carry those beliefs into our adult lives. So to change those is no small task, and it requires a lot of getting to know ourselves, how it is that we relate to ourselves, and tracing that back as learned behavior. It's one more place where we need to allow people to have their own opinions, because if we're seeking support and working recovery, then we're going to have people in our path who see us very differently than we see ourselves. And we need to allow them to have their own opinion. We need to allow them to build us up and to share the things about us that we appreciate, that they appreciate about us. And incrementally, we can honor and let people have their own beliefs and consider that those things may be true. It's as simple as taking compliments. It's as simple as receiving the praise and validation that you killed yourself to earn. It's uncomfortable to take those things in. It's uncomfortable to internalize them because they challenge what it is that we believe about ourselves. And if we come to realize that our self-image is distorted, that we believe things that aren't true, then those things become responsibilities. We have to change them. Your identity, ideally, is at some point something that you come to terms with spiritually. I think this is a place where an awful lot of us get stuck in early recovery. We're afraid of choosing a higher power. We're afraid to connect to or relate to something more powerful than ourselves. And I always remind folks, you don't have to get hung up on whether or not there's a God. You don't have to get hung up on ideas about religion. You can simply choose something pragmatically that works for you. I've always loved the acronym of God. It stands for Group of Drunks. The idea that the program of AA is more powerful than the individual and has greater capacity to help the person stay sober. I've worked with plenty of people who choose nature as their higher power, or their chosen family as their higher power. It can be anything that supports your recovery. And then ideally, your spirituality extends to weighing and considering what are the things that you truly believe and truly value. And my hope is that you come to a place of having greater faith and confidence in yourself. And my friend artist would always say, hang with the winners. And what she meant by that was spend time with people who are kindred spirits, but who are also doing the work, who are seeking a better life and pursuing it pretty tenaciously. So I'm going to get down to some things that I think are absolutely important choices. But I'm going to check the streams real quick because I always love hearing from you. Hope things are going well with you, and happy to talk about things that aren't necessarily on topic. If you have questions about your recovery, always want to be a resource there. Okay, the streams are quiet today. No worries. So, as I've said, the most important things you can choose, self-respect and fairness. Choose to have an active support system, to have people who will challenge you and support you. And then, when necessary, and at the appropriate time, choose outside help. Having someone that can support your recovery, not just from substance use disorder, but also from trauma, is for most of us a vital piece of this. So choose self-respect and fairness. Choose dignity. Dignity is so simple but so powerful. You can tell a great deal about a person just from where their eyes are. And when people are coming from a place of shame, they know the color of everybody's shoes, but they don't know the color of anybody's eyes. Choose integrity. Do what it is that you say you will do. Choose honesty. And when it comes to how you talk to yourself, how you relate to yourself, choose rigorous honesty. I think in terms of all of our interactions and relationships, rigorous honesty is really just an ideal. But when it comes to how you talk to yourself, what comes out in your journaling, what kind of goals and plans you're making in your life, I have yet to find anything in this world worth lying to myself over. But what we're transforming in part is our addictive thinking, which is rationalizing, justifying, and minimizing. All of which, of course, are nice words for lying. So choosing honesty is something that you might take for granted about yourself. In fact, some of the most important aspects, kindness, is something that we might easily take for granted about ourselves, and yet it is extraordinarily important. I'm always preaching the importance of choosing accountability, because what I know is that my follow-through improves about 10,000% when I have people holding me accountable for the commitments I make, for the goals that I set. Choose dependability. Choose to be someone who shows up. I always quote Woody Allen's 80% of success is showing up. Choose your work ethic, and ideally choose not to kill yourself in trying to prove anything. We don't need to prove anything. We need to accept, we need to come to a place of healing each part of ourselves so that we can feel whole. Choose your beliefs and values, but get past the idea that you're choosing once and for all. Life experiences and what we discover down the road through the course of recovery means that we may receive new insight or new information, and so we can make those changes. We have a tendency to approach things as though it's a once and for all decision, a now or never kind of ultimatum. Choose who you're going to be connected to. Choose mindfulness. Choose to be aware of self. And increasingly practice grounding skills. Practice meditation. Practice anything that helps you to be more connected to your physical self, your emotional self, your mental self, and your spiritual self. Yoga is great for that. Body work is great for that. Any type of healing, whether it's acupuncture or chiropractic care or massage therapy or Reiki or anything that works for you. All of those choices are investments in self that yield further healing and a deeper understanding of self. Choose the direction of your life, the purpose and the passion of your life, and this is one more place where we tend to get stuck. We don't have to choose just one life, one career, or just one passion. We're free to choose many. My experience is that this too is something that we approach as a once and for all decision, and that's just a really bad idea. I think I was on career number 6 before I got to where it is that I most wanted to be, and even then I have found so many different offshoots from my career and different things that I get to do. So don't approach it as a one-size-fits-all. Approach it using the KISS system, the Keep It Simple system. Do lots of writing, do lots of reflection, and whenever you're stuck, imagine what you would say to a friend in your shoes. Imagine what you would say to someone that you really love in your shoes. But above all, choose kindness and respectfulness to self and others. And If you can learn to be patient with yourself and with the process, I promise that more will be revealed. I promise that more and more possibilities will be born into your life. And of course, as always, I would love to have you connect with me. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest way to do that. Would love to have you head over to our YouTube channel for Sober Now. Lots and lots of free videos and live streams there to check out. Different topics of recovery available. And of course, we'd love to have you check out our website. Sobernow.com is now a subscription service, so for under $15 a month, you can access our home study programs, the first of which fosters recovery from substance use disorder, and the second of which is for folks like myself, affected others who have loved ones in active addiction, and examining how we cope with that and how we best support ourselves as families as we're going through this. So, winding down for today, look forward to joining you next week, and please, as always, take excellent care of yourself and reach out for